welcome to Dark Days Radio presents Darkhammer, a Worlds of Warhammer RPG podcast. I'm one of your regular hosts, Chris, and I'm joined by Mike. Hey Mike, how's it going?
It's going great. Currently, I guess in a bunker or a dungeon or something, because my ping is through the roof. So you might hear some little gaps and delays in this episode, but we'll do our best in post production to fix all that. And yeah, glad to be here, Chris, and excited to talk about our topic for tonight. And what is that?
We're going to talk about Khorne. We're going to talk about the Chaos Gods, and we're going to start with Khorne. So I guess this will be the first of one of four, maybe one of many, where we start going through the ruinous powers and their agents, their demons, their various entities that exist within their pantheon, because obviously they're in all three Warhammer RPGs, within all three Warhammer settings. So they are the glue that binds, as it were, and we're going to look at how we can make use of them in our roleplay games, because while on the surface they're quite obvious, maybe, or maybe not as obvious, I think there's a lot of nuance that can be achieved with them. Before we get into that, though, let's do a little bit of a game update. So, Mike, what have you been playing? Any miniatures or anything like that?
I was playing some Dungeons and Dragons last weekend with actually some old high school friends and some college folks as well. So that was a lot of fun. The adventure was based off of the Red Wedding from the Game of Thrones book series and also the TV show, wherein, it happens at a wedding and things go south and you're stuck in the middle of the castle and you have to try to escape. So I thought that was a fun little reversal of the usual D&D tropes. And people loved it, had a good time. There was a bit of a Scooby-Doo reveal at the very end, which really played out pretty well. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And Chris, how about you? What have you been playing lately?
Let's think. Well, I think since I last recorded and since the last episode, Realm of Fire, I've played some Warcry. So I got a friend back into, well, we won't be wargaming as much, but so I think it's the first time I met up with him since the pandemic. So we've done some role play online together, but it was the first time doing some miniatures gaming. So I introduced him to Warcry. Now, obviously, it was only 1.0, so second edition is out as of today, and I'm waiting for my core game to arrive. But yeah, he really liked it because of just how simple it is. Like, the idea that it only takes up a coffee table of space, and you've only got like a certain number of miniatures, like a dozen or less, and just how fast the gameplay is. So that was really a really good fun scenario. So we used the Red Harvest terrain, all the sluices and mining
Yep.
devices that were there in that terrain set, and the objective was to gather treasure. And you think, okay, gather treasure, easy enough. No, not when the treasure is actually Varanite. So your warriors were going across the board, searching for Varanite, fighting each other to get more of it, because there's only a certain number of tokens on the board once you've discovered it. And at the end of every activation, so once a fighter's fully done all of its actions, uh, they take damage from the treasure they are carrying, because the Varanite is this mutagenic, warp tainted warp stone from mined from the earth in the ore points near the Varan Spire. So it was pretty brutal on the fighters. And yeah, it was just a really good close game. So I'm looking forward to playing some second edition. I don't think, I mean, we'll mostly talk about this more on Realm of Fire. I don't think reactions are actually going to, in practice, make a huge difference to gameplay. I think it might mean you're a bit more engaged in it while your opponent is activating their character, their models. And then otherwise, I've just been painting lots of Necromunda stuff and gearing up ready to do a campaign, which I think at this rate is going to be end of September because I've got too much going on in my house with a kitchen refit. So, though I'll be playing like at the local gaming club, I think that's going to be the plan. Oh, also in learning to drive, because once I've passed that, then obviously getting terrain kits and miniatures up to the gaming club will be much simpler. So yeah, that's pretty much it right now.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I remember you were saying that you're looking for that Bloodborne Barnes and Noble exclusive version of Warcry as well.
Yeah,
So that seems like it might be pretty cool, like a great option for even quicker introduction to Warcry.
yeah, it's hex based. It's been out for at least a year or so, and it's one of those games which gets a release in, I would say, in regions where they don't have as many Games Workshop stores for their, Warhammer stores for the, IP presence. So, yeah, Bloodborne basically is Warcry on a hex grid, a smaller board again. So there's no 3D terrain elements to it, but essentially the rules are pretty much the same with, you know, alternating activation, and you get two actions per character, blah blah blah. And you get two warbands in there, so you get the blood. Is it the Godsworn Hunt? I think. Yeah, and there's some other chaos one in there. And then you also get cards for two other warbands, which are warbands from Warhammer Underworld. So the point is, the warbands you get in there, they're only like a half dozen models or less because they're actually using kits from Warhammer Underworlds. So the two in there you get are like a Dark Oath one and a Slaves to Darkness Chaos Warriors one, and then the other two
Hmm.
warbands you can add to it. I think one of them is a Zinchian warband with the Zangors, or maybe it was the Slaaneshi one. I can't remember, but yeah, there are options. There is actually room to expand it. So I think it's a really cool introduction to both Games Workshop stuff, Age of Sigmar, and Warcry.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds really cool. And yeah, why don't we move on over to talking a little bit of gaming news as well?
So yes, obviously Warcry 2.0 is out. We'll talk about that on Realm of Fire at some point when we get a chance to. Uh, we also have, I think, the most interesting thing for Necromunda coming up, which is the first book of an ongoing campaign they are doing for Necromunda. So, the Great Rift, the Secretix Maledictum, obviously tore split the galaxy in half into the Imperium. The Imperium is divided in two, and that means that's been a major plot point in Warhammer 40,000 books for like the last 3 years, more. Uh, so what they are doing now is they are, I guess, basically bringing the Necromunda timeline up to contemporary 40k. So the Great Rift is visible across the galaxy. It's visible from Necromunda, and that the opening of that Great Rift has precipitated some calamitous events on Necromunda, including the attempted assassination of the Lord Governor Helmore of Necromunda. So he's in stasis, you know, and that means there's going to be political craziness going on Necromunda, which of course is going to spill out into the houses of Necromunda and how they basically will commit to warfare against each other and back hopefully the winning party who will take over as Lord Governor of Necromunda. So I think that just shows that Necromunda as a setting has grown ever more. I mean, we've had also the the Ash Waste book, which is really awesome. There's lots of cool stuff in there, which I can't wait to start using with vehicle rules in it. Wonder, but yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
We'll have to get that campaign and review it on Darkhammer as like a RPG
Yeah,
supplement. Maybe I think that'd be a very interesting idea. To go along with Wrath and
I
Glory.
definitely, I think definitely that's a really good idea. Also, in related kind of gaming news, I know Dark Tide has been delayed until I think November. So that's the Warhammer 40,000 uh, first person shooter, I guess. First person shooter,
Yep.
first whatever you describe Vermintide to be. Dark Tide is the equivalent for 40k. Um, that looks really good though. That looks super cool.
Yeah. Darktide is pretty neat, and I like Vermintide. It's a very efficient game for what it is of hacking through tons of rats and stuff. So it's pretty neat. But I think another piece of news that I wanted to bring up. I know this is Darkhammer, Chris, not Dark Iron, but War Machine Mark IV has been getting a lot of announcements, and I think it's pretty interesting. I think they learned a lot from the choices they made with Mark III, and there's a lot of excitement about this. And I think it's gonna definitely make some waves in the near future.
Yeah, so I guess it will be our plan. We will do a Dark Iron series. I'm going to try and work out a logo for it. I think I can do that these days. My skills have improved, or I might just ask someone to make a new logo for us. Um, but yeah, we're going to do some Dark Iron episodes. We can trundle those out when we feel like we've read up on the relevant stuff. We can get someone on to chat about it. But yeah, basically, War Machine 4.0 will kick us off into that. So I'm heavily biased as well on this, with having written for Private Press for the Iron Kingdoms RPG. But so to put that into role play terms for people, uh, War Machine 4.0 takes place after the after well, let's just say it's in the future that the Iron Kingdoms RPG, so Iron Kingdoms Requiem, is exploring. So Requiem is set before Mark IV. So we're seeing, I think, if I'm right, something almost like a 20-year time skip between the end of Mark III to the start of Mark IV, which is huge because a lot can happen in 20 years in a setting that was essentially on the cusp of a form of industrial revolution. And we're going to see how that influences both the look of the warjacks and their technologies. We also have the Orgoth returning and invading Kador. Hashtag Lael laughs for once about someone being invaded. Um,
Mm.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see perhaps how Lael as a country has evolved. There's also the evolution of um, the retribution of Syra and the elves in the kingdom of Eos, because they're basically all dead. They're all dead. They've basically become undead. That is an undead kingdom of undead elves, which again is very different. Uh, yeah, so I am back painting, slowly painting some MK3 starter sets for War Machine, because they're doing some things. They're locking in for the fourth edition rule set. You're going to get all the cards for all the stuff ever produced before, and that will be locked in and never change. And then anything they produce, all the cards that they do, I say cards, it's all going to be digital. All the cards for all the new releases will be have continuous updates to keep game balance, and there'll be, I think, a free app. The rules are free. Uh, they're doing some interesting things with how they're producing the game, and rules wise, you can read the beta of the War Machine rules right now, I think there's some good changes there. Like they're getting rid of facings, they're getting rid of stuff like free strikes. So they've gone in and taken a machete to the rule system to streamline it. So yeah, and that makes me think about. It made me think out loud about how I'm actually quite glad I've got all the books for the previous edition of the Iron Kingdoms RPG, because that's actually represents then quite a good skirmish system for Iron Kingdoms, where you want to play something where you don't have just warjacks. So I've got an idea, but like I'm going to keep it under my hat for a bit because I've got ideas. Anyway, enough about War Machine. This is about Warhammer. So I guess we should chat about Khorne.
Yep, let's do it.
Right, Khorne. We're going to start with the simpler introduction to who Khorne is, and we're going to begin with the origins of, I guess, the Chaos Gods in general, in some respects, and then more specifically to do with Khorne. So, in Warhammer, the old world, and thus for Age of Sigmar, because that is the future setting of Warhammer Fantasy. Chaos is essentially a primeval force. It's a alternate dimension where we'll say psychic and magical energy coalesces and forms and allows magic to occur in the old world. You know, it seeps in, and that's what people wield to perform magical abilities. Maybe also it's the same thing which in effect empowers priests, because they're calling on divine powers, divine intervention. That's obviously going to be a blessing from their gods, and their gods, whether they're good or bad, exist within the realm of chaos. This is the realm of deities and demons, and I'm sure stranger entities as well. Now, the realm of chaos is important because it is this kind of subspace, let's call it subspace or hyperspace, if we use a Babylon 5 term there, which allowed the old ones to come from whatever world they originated from to the old world. So it's a form of fast travel across the heavens, let's just say, for Warhammer Fantasy purposes. And the old ones constructed essentially giant stargates at the poles of the old world, which allowed them to travel to and from the old world. However, everything, of course, went bad, and in the Warhammer Fantasy setting, these Chaos Gates collapsed onto the old world. They crashed into the poles, and that explosion of energy from those gates caused a merger between or rift between the realm of chaos and the old world, and that's from where magical energy spills into the old world and is what allows, I guess, more magical powers to be wielded than normally should be allowed. The realms of chaos, the realms of chaos with their merger into the old world means as you get closer and closer to the North Pole, there is a point where that is. It's not going to be a distinct line in the sand, but there's a point where you are crossing into a merger between the material and the immaterial, as it were. Now, within the realm of chaos, as I said, there are entities, gods, and there are, of course, the chaos gods. They are, well, you could actually say there's mostly multiple chaos gods, but because chaos by its nature is chaotic, there are different facets to it, different ways it can manifest. But we typically experience the chaos gods as one of the four major gods of that pantheon. So, of these gods, we have Khorne, we have Nurgle, we have Tzeentch, and we have Slaanesh. And we're going to talk about Khorne because Khorne is, in essence, more than likely in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, the oldest god, even though time is kind of is a construct which only makes sense in the material world. But Khorne is likely the oldest or more the most foundational and principal of the Chaos gods, because Khorne is focused on the emotions and urges around bloodshed and warfare and rage and anger, which every creature experiences at some level, because they have to survive, and survival means bloodshed. Of course, bloodshed and the need to commit murder, commit death, destruction, uh, that becomes a very different urge when it's coming from sentient beings like humans, like dwarves, like elves, and other creatures like that. So the other thing we should then say is that Khorne's influence waxes and wanes like all the other Chaos gods, but is always at its zenith when war and battle is prevalent within the world. So when it's between wars, Khorne is mostly not as powerful. You could possibly say mostly more powerful is going to be Slaanesh, who is kind of the polar opposite of Khorne, or Tzeentch, because Tzeentch is a manipulator and is more interested in that kind of intrigue and manipulating people to create conspiracies to cause the downfall of the world. The other interesting aspect we should say, and this is a point you picked up on, Mike, is that of the Chaos gods, we should also wonder if, and I don't know whether this is ever has a solid question, but do we consider that the mortal gods, we call them, like Sigmar, Myrmidon, and Ulrich, who are also gods of warfare to some degree, whether they are aspects of Khorne or they are vying against Khorne? So are they separate entities, or are they minor deities, or are they just chaos through a particular lens?
Right, right. Yeah, that was it was discussed a little bit in the End Times Malekith book back in the day for the end of the Warhammer setting, and it was also kind of explored and hinted at in some other books. There was this question as to whether or not they are separate or just aspects of them, and this is for mortal gods like Sigmar for the humans, but also for the elven gods like Cain, the god of murder for the elves themselves. So I don't think it's ever been really strictly stated if this is the case or not. And it gets even murkier in Age of Sigmar, right? Because Sigmar literally has been running around, whether in physical or
Yeah,
supernatural forms, um, and has been affecting the mortal realms. So, is he an aspect of Khorne? It seems like probably not at this point in the Age of Sigmar game. But if you're playing Soulbound, there could be a heresy that believes that Sigmar is just an aspect of Khorne, and that could be pretty interesting to deal with. Or maybe even your characters might join that heresy.
that would be fascinating to explore. It would also be really interesting to see how that would also interplay um, with the Daughters of Cain, since Marathi has ascended to godhood and is identifying as Marathi Cain, and so has taken on all the aspects of Cain, who is the murder god, because that god essentially died during the end times, or has been dead for some time, and she has the Iron Heart of Cain. So yeah, that's a very but that essentially what you're getting at there is the fact that you could is how you can have cornate how potentially cornate cults and heretics can be within the ranks of the priesthoods of other gods that have warlike or murderous associations, such as Marathi Cain or Sigmar or I can't think of the other one right now. Whichever one of the Duardin gods it is, who's
Mm-hmm.
also quite
Yeah.
warlike. Um, and that also then plays into how we have to consider maybe how the orc gods are again a different thing, because they're very warlike, but they're more about destruction, versus Khorne's just total bloodshed. So there's some very interesting interplay there.
Right, right. Yeah, certainly. And let's stick with Age of Sigmar a little bit here, because when Age of Sigmar first hit back in, what was that, 2015, the Blades of Khorne were the major antagonist to the Stormcast Eternals. They were really put front and center, and Khorne was given a high bill in the game originally. And the Blades of Khorne are kind of just a representation of the different war hosts that roam the mortal realms, slaughtering civilizations and piling skulls as high as mountains. And they're basically just a bunch of muscular dudes designed to be a kind of Conan style antagonist. Um, so they're pretty much what you'd expect from Khorne, but there's actually a lot of like really cool characters that are associated with them. For example, there's Valkia, who's the queen of the Bloodbound, and she is so angry, so pissed that Khorne keeps resurrecting her whenever she dies. And I've heard that a lot of people really like her Black Library novels as well. So there's definitely some good characterization there.
That's very interesting. Yeah,
Yep.
like Corn obviously has a huge influence on the realm of fire because there are many. That's essentially the first uh, beachhead of Sigmarite forces back into the mortal realms in Age of Sigmar. So, and that's why we saw that focus on Cornate, on the Blades of Khorne and Cornate Warhost, because that was essentially the first, forces of chaos that the Stormcast were up against as they waged, came in and started establishing their cities like Hammerhall and so forth in the realm of Akshai. So
Right.
there's there's a lot there with how in Age of Sigmar there's likely a lot of people. We say barbarian hordes, but the people that existed in that nightmarish kind of post-apocalyptic setting of the realm of fire, and had to a certain extent, maybe give some degree of reverence to Khorne, even though they wanted to just try and survive. Um, there's also, I think, one of the moons of, or it's one of the stars, but one of the suns of Akshai is actually tainted by chaos, and I'm sure part of it is like ruled over by Khorne. Um, but that's something we can get into when we talk about the mortal realms themselves, because like there's a whole like 12 of them to talk about at some point.
Hmm.
Right. Okay. So that's kind of an overview of Khorne's origins and what he's like in the fantasy universe. So in 40k, things are somewhat different because we actually have a bit of a timeline. So, and of course, the origin of gods is quite different. So the old ones, back to the old ones again, are a ancient alien race that traveled the galaxy, populating it with various sentient beings, and they use the warp to traverse space very quickly, and they eventually came into conflict with the Necrontyr, who would go on to be the Necrons, and that war in heavens tainted the warp. So much bloodshed, so it started to create and coalesce entities and other beings there related to other emotions because there was so much strife. And so that's mostly when the first motes of the entity that would become known as Khorne began to manifest. So it's believed Khorne and the other two Chaos Gods at the time, so Zeech and Nurgle, came into existence in the galaxy, in the universe, around about 1000 AD. So that's also consistent with a lot when there was a lot of warfare, and a lot of bloodshed occurring on Earth. And if you think about it, humans as a race in the 40k universe were essentially, you could almost think, were mostly designed by the old ones to be this ultimate psychic weapon that even makes the Eldari kind of pale in comparison to. We also have the Eldari god Karl Kane. So again, this murder god, this war god, which the Eldari have. But again, that's represents a slightly different approach to warfare, one which is more controlled. And I think that's the point we're getting at with these different entities, about where murderal warfare has a end goal beyond the very act itself, whereas Khorne is just interested in the act of warfare and bloodshed and death. And that's the point of it. There's nothing more. Whether it brings about a new kingdom or peace, Khorne doesn't care. Bringing about peace is the worst thing. Anyway, so then we have later on, of course, even more bloodshed and destruction in the galaxy, because humanity spreads out through the stars. They come into contact with the orcs. Humanity has its war against the Men of Iron, and there's the Dark Age technology and the Age of Strife, which leads to eventually in the 31st millennium, the Emperor's Great Crusade, which again leads to a lot of warfare, as various former kingdoms or empires, planets are brought back into the fold, not all willingly, so that leads to more warfare, and that leads to humans with their emotions fueling this entity that exists in the warp. So that must have been very difficult for the Emperor to balance, knowing that he had to do this horrific work in the vain hope that it might bring about peace. And of course, we then eventually have the Horus Heresy, which just magnifies all these problems evermore. So yeah, the 40k universe is pretty much a smorgasbord for Khorne, because there's war and bloodshed going on somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yep. In the grim dark future, there is only war, so Khorne is doing pretty well. Yeah, and that's a great history that went over there, Chris. You know, by the time of the 41st millennium, the banner boys of Khorne are, of course, the World Eaters, which are like a Chaos Space Marine legion of genetically engineered superhumans that all have these brain implants in their heads, which make them incredible fighters, but also make them go crazy with bloodlust. And they are, of course, at this point, worshippers of Khorne, and their Primarch, their leader, Angron, even basically becomes this demon prince that almost looks like a bloodthirster. So they really represent Khorne in many ways. But of course, there's chaos cults that continue to threaten the remnants of the Imperium of Man, insidiously corrupting decadent nobles or going after the oppressed workers. And, I think in a little bit we're going to talk about some of the different Khorne cults that we've seen in some of the books and material that are definitely good for RPGs. But before we discuss that, Chris, do we want to talk a bit more about what Khorne is about and why perhaps people would worship him?
Yeah, I mean, let's get into that, because we've basically said a lot that, reiterated quite a few times, that Khorne is about, I guess it's unrelenting, just bloodshed. So Khorne is not a death god in the sense of we think of, I don't know, like, I guess we could think of in the sense of Nagash, or a death god in the sense of Ynid, the god of the dead of the Eldari. It's just about this unrelenting need to kill and allow blood to flow, and just keep, fighting and fighting and getting angrier and angrier, and again showing that ultimately the only true thing in the universe is the need to kill, and that the only thing that allows for ultimate power in the universe is physical might and strength in combat. There's nothing more to it, and I think that's where we have to make show the difference between Khorne and other gods. I think we've said that where Myrmidon is about warfare, it's about warfare, but it's committed with precision and tactics. With Sigmar, it's mostly warfare committed for, but it's for a higher ideal. it ultimately leads to some higher ideal to fight against evil in the world. Khorne isn't about fighting evils, nor is it about just fighting the good, people that are doing good. It's not. It's not even about opposition to things. It's just about fighting against anyone. So in that respect, then it means while you may think murder might fall into his auspices, but murder is, either it's an act of passion, which might make it more a Slanesh thing, or it's so planned it might fall into the fall into kind of Zinch's court, and hence why the murder gods like Cain are again quite different, because it's about that intent to kill, but again there's an end reason to it.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's those are great points. Just kind of about the, I guess you could say, philosophy of all this. And we see the many of the cults of Khorne that do exist in the different Warhammer universes. Frequently, they're very very bloodthirsty. In many ways, they're kind of this bright flame which sparks up and frequently is stopped by in Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Fantasy, by witch hunters perhaps, or even just armies of Empire soldiers. In 40k, it might be the Inquisition, Imperial Guardsmen, or Planetary Defense Force that have to deal with them. Or in the context of Necromunda, it might just be gangs that are down there in the Underhive. Um, so a lot of them can be quite bloody. But there are some that actually kind of stand out as being a little bit different than just kind of crazed bloodshed. For example, in the Gaunt's Ghost series, there's the Blood Pact. So there was this rogue warlord in the Sabbat sector who created basically a militant priesthood to conquer his planet. And these chaos worshipping warrior priests eventually turned to Khorne and became the Blood Pact, which are a highly disciplined fighting force. They, instead of just charging at the enemy like a Khorne berserker or the world eaters of the 40k setting, they use ambushes, terror, and precision strikes to try to decimate the Imperial Guard. And on the other hand, in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Second Edition, one of the major antagonists was the Cult of the Crimson Skull. And this was a chaos cult that originally infiltrated the Empire during and kind of after the Great War against Chaos. And they formed this sort of stay-behind army that existed for 300 years, kind of infiltrating different warrior lodges of the Empire, and probably Kislev as well. And this cult would be very picky about its members, because it didn't want any psychotic worshippers out doing murder when they wanted to be a secretive cult. So instead they looked for individuals with patience and dedication. And this cult of the Crimson Skull frequently actually used Sigmarite priests for blood sacrifices. So you can see that these guys would be very interesting to introduce into Age of Sigmar as well as an antagonist for, say, Soulbound in that role playing game. So that's just a couple examples of some of the different cults that we've seen that I think stand out a little bit.
I mean, there are a few named cults in, for instance, in Necromunda. Because the other thing is we should say is that often chaos cults do not worship Khorne by name, if that makes sense.
Right.
They worship deities who, under it all, it is Khorne they're worshipping. The rituals and rites are fueling that god, but it's not Khorne by name. So, for instance, on Necromunda, this is coming from the Book of Ruin. There is they call various cults that might refer to Khorne as, for example, the Scratcher or the Red God or the Lord of Skin and Sinew. And of course, the ultimate chaos cult on Necromunda, and likely occurs elsewhere, uh, wherever there is corpse starch and wherever there is the need to refine corpse starch, there are the cannibal cults of which are generally known on Necromunda as corpse grinder cults. So this is where the dead on Necromunda, we'll just say for now, the bodies are gathered up and are recycled to create food known as corpse starch. Now, part of the act of going from a dead human to foil wrapped, uh, Aquila embossed, stamped and sealed rations of corpse starch, there is an act in there that the meat, the product, has to be consecrated. So there is an act there to turn it, where essentially we're saying it goes from being human flesh into food. So it's kind of a bit like it's kind of a bit like transubstantiation in Catholicism, of all things. Anyway, but the point is that the corpse growler cults are those workers who get a taste for the meat before it's been consecrated, and that is what leads them down to the worship of Khorne, because they just can't get enough of it, and the only way they can get more is by killing people. So yeah, the corpse cults are absolutely horrific. But I think that's where it gets us into how, and I've definitely read it somewhere within the Eisenhorn books. I can't remember where. I want to say it's in the Magos, but don't quote me on that. Is there was reference again to, on some world, a cult that I'm sure venerated a a pig, like a pig god. So they had a deity that was, associated with pigs, because they venerated it so that they would get good harvests, when they're slaughtering their pigs and growing them. But underneath all that, it was a Khornate cult. And I think that just shows how you can get quite a lot of variety from followers of Khorne who aren't just our angry Khorne berserkers, if we're going to pick our poster boys of Khornate followers. So, and I think that's mostly where it's going to get us into now, where we're going to talk about role playing Khorne, by which we mean how do we portray the antagonists of Khorne. And given that we have also, and this actually goes back to gaming news, for Soulbound, we've got Champions of Chaos has been announced. So playable, you can play Chaos Cultists, and in Wrath and Glory, you can play Chaos Cultists, and in Warhammer Fantasy, yeah, sure, you can play Chaos Cultists. It's going to happen at some point. So we're going to chat about that briefly, about how we portray Chaos Cultists and how we might play as them, which is going to be really weird and interesting. Right. So I guess we follow on from our thought process of how not all Chaos Cultists are Khorne berserkers, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I wish I'd read more about the corpse grinder cults, because that's my first idea on here was pretty similar. In a lot of early religions, priests were also butchers. So what if you had a society in 40k or Age of Sigmar where only priests could cut up the dangerous fauna of their land? So the constant butchering and handling of meat could mean that some would begin to worship Khorne rather than their state-sanctioned deity. So that could be just one way that a small cult could start to kind of insinuate itself into a society. Another pretty cool
Yeah,
source for Khorne knowledge. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
I was going to jump in on that one. So I think that works really well for Warhammer, because in Warhammer Fantasy, because you can then have in isolated communities in the Empire. We'll use the Empire because it's more obvious, maybe. But in isolated communities, you could definitely see how certain festivals to which is the wilderness. God, hold on. Let me just Warhammer gods. Let me just do a Google search
Oh,
and find my
Tall. Tall is the wilderness god, I think.
Carl, yeah, or similar, yeah, or Raya, or Ulrich as well would be good. But again, if there is veneration of those, and there is some sort of ritual feast or slaughter that is done to get the blessings of that god, you could see how a cultist, a heretic, could essentially uh, taint the rituals, and eventually over time turn that small community towards unwittingly worshipping Khorne.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a great idea.
I have a few other ones as well that I'm going to go on. Sorry,
Okay.
I'll lag.
Okay.
I was going to go on. the other one, the other ideas I'm going to go off is you've watched Brotherhood of the Wolf, I hope as well. So I think you could go with
Yeah.
ideas in Warhammer Fantasy, like hunting lodges would be good. Uh, Again, because if you're out in the wilderness and you're hunters, you are mostly going. They're likely eating a large amount of game, things like that, and they'll have trophies, pelts, skulls, and teeth. So again, I think that could easily become a good cover for a cornate cult because every so often the thing they hunt is for man flesh. Um,
Hmm.
uh, and then also within a going back to our murder gods, uh, I think we could have some sort of assassins guild, which could or community, fraternity, whatever, which again gets slowly perturbed to Khorne, where they bring up their followers and do their teachings and go how to turn people into wonderful assassins that go out in the Warhammer world and cause all manner of problems. But there's mostly those high-ranking assassins, members of that cult, well, it's now become a cult, who also keep the bodies of their victims for whether it's just to keep the skulls because they keep trophies, or it also goes into cannibalism. Uh, I think the big warning on all of this is more than likely, in no matter which way you portray a cornate cult, there's potential for characters engaging in cannibalism. So that's something you're going to have to talk to your players at the table about. That there's going to be either conversations of characters taking, committing cannibalism, or players maybe even wanting to play a cannibal. But that's a huge check with your player group.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, those are great ideas, and I'm getting the idea that maybe in the Predator movies, the Predator aliens are actually Khorne cultists. You never know, could be.
That's a
Um,
really good one. Yeah.
yeah, that's some good inspiration. Yeah, so another idea that isn't from an existing book that you were just kind of giving me is that you can have an interesting sort of hybrid cult between Slanesh and Khorne, which focuses on maybe tattooing, or this is getting into content warning territory, but self harm or self mutilation as well.
Mm.
So instead of the bloodshed being enacted on others, it could be a more internalized to the individual that worships. So that could be kind of something. I don't want to say interesting, but something pretty bleak to explore with a character in any of the Warhammer role playing games. In addition to that, there was, of course, the Black Crusade role playing game from Fantasy Flight, and that has a couple of interesting ideas. Um, if you go through into the Tome of Blood source book, there are a couple options for heretics and renegades. So there's the Zerunt Frost Fathers, which are tribal humans that are devoted to their own form of Khorne. And it's a similar idea to what you just had, Chris, about trying to become peak hunters and leaders in their world. So slaying monstrous and human prey with their arrows that are ceramite piercing. So very, very powerful weapons. And also, they can ride giant lizards. So that's kind of cool as well. Another idea in that book was the Chem Hunters of Messia, which live on a polluted, wrecked world, and they actually have to consume drug cocktails to survive out in the wilderness. And they go out there because they are helping drill or scout for promethium. And of course, they have a lot of hate and rage towards the drill barons who oppress them out there. So many go rogue and turn to the worship of of Khorne, um, alongside roving bands of mutants on that planet. And the book also notes that some worship Nurgle as well. So I think those are both pretty cool concepts for 40k, which were introduced in an older version of 40k role playing.
Yeah, going off that, I think that's. I'm thinking back to Warhammer to Necromunda. I think there's also you could look at pit slaves, and so you're going
Hmm.
into perhaps looking at transhumanism, where the and kind of like perversions of cult mechanicus, where you're changing parts of your body for augmentation that makes you a good pit fighter, maybe, or just makes you a good fighter in general. But that drive to become the perfect killer through self augmentation. I mean, it goes back to the idea of the kind of like that tattooing, but where this way it's about changing your hand for a drill or a buzzsaw or something like that, and that's again, I think looks at how the point we're getting at is different ways of how characters can interact with the philosophy of Khorne, and it doesn't mean immediately you're just a raving psychopath killer. Uh, like eventually you might get there, but I think there can be quite a long, winding path to that end point for those characters, and then they go off the deep end. And I think that's the point. Is that they're always they're getting every step along the way they get more and more indulgence in just the wanton killing they're doing, and they begin to forget about why they even formed a collective in the first place, which got perverted to the teachings of Khorne. I'm trying to think of some other interesting perhaps examples. I mean, within the age of Sigmar, you're also going to we've also seen already, and this comes back to different cults, we can also look at it through the lens of what we know through Warcry. There are lots of war bands in Warcry that venerate chaos as a through different kind of manifestations. So you've got the Tarantulos brood that see chaos as this giant spider, or you've got the Cipher Lords, or you've got the Dark Oath. And I think what you can do is look at those war bands, and some of them might be more suited to being tainted by chaos, by Khorne, sorry, by tainted by Khorne, and look at how one of those war bands, a member of those war bands, might fall further and further to being more cornate. Like the is it which one is it? The bird-like ones, the carrion. Is it carrion lords? Carrion crows?
That that sounds right.
Why can't I think
Yeah,
about
the ones
band?
that have like crow
Yeah,
like feathers on them. Yep.
and a crow would also fit quite well. Like a crow god would fit quite well with um, with Khorne, because crows and vultures and carrion birds and carrion creatures uh, being present after a battle. So you could see how that would fit. Oh, that's actually a good idea with the with Warhammer Fantasy. What is it? What's the? There's a proper term for it, isn't it? For the people that pick over the bodies or after a battle, looking for trinkets and so forth. Those could easily become skull collectors and turn to the worship of Khorne, because they would initially see the blessing of Khorne being war happens because we've asked Khorne for war to occur, and then we benefit from it. But eventually, they will get so drawn into it that they just want war for the sake of it, rather than for the bounty that they get from the dead.
Yeah. Looters. A looter becomes eventually the merchant of Khorne. I like it. Great character concept.
Yeah, that's dark.
Yeah, a little
Um,
bit.
right. I think we can wrap up. I think the I think we got to the point really, which is there's a lot of ways of portraying and playing as a worshipper of Khorne, and sure, while you could have your archetypes, your stereotype like the Blades of Khorne or the World Eaters, Space Marines, they are the real, they are the ultimate extreme end of of and the very end point of worshipping Khorne. And along that road, there are numerous paths that lead pretty much to the same end point. But how you get there is where all the interesting stuff happens.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I just have a couple things to mention at the tail end here. We're really focusing this episode on Khorne's philosophy, such as it is, and his mortal cults. But we can mention his demons a little bit real fast. Though
Oh
they're
yeah, sure.
usually a bit more straightforward, yeah, than the other ones. We've got, of course, the Bloodthirsters, which are big bull-headed gods with giant wings and a variety of weapons. And there's some of the most powerful beasts to come up against in the entire Warhammer demonic pantheon, if you will. Whether it be Age of Sigmar, 40k, etc. And they just tear through people. Bloodletters are the more human-sized beings, usually with swords. They are really just a one-trick pony going in and attacking. They don't really have much free thought for themselves, so not great at conversations. Flesh hounds are pretty neat. They are these basically kind of hounds, red hounds with some kind of green fins, and they hunt. This is more of a 40k aspect, but they usually hunt their victims by tracking their psychic energy, basically. That lets them hunt, which is actually interesting. If you put them up against Tau, they might have a bit more trouble sniffing them out. Just a little fun fact right there. And then, of course, you have the juggernauts of Khorne, which are these giant metallic, living metal demonic rhinoceri, essentially, which different champions of Khorne might ride upon. And those were always interesting because you would find them in Warhammer 40,000, but they also let you have the miniature, I believe, in Warhammer Fantasy in some editions, which always seems like an interesting choice, definitely.
Yeah. There's also that weird. I can't remember what it's called. What's the weird thing that the bloodletters can ride upon in in
Oh,
in both? It's like a chariot, but you can use it in both, and it also has like a gun built into it. It's hold on, I'm literally on the Games Workshop website.
yeah.
Help you this. It's a there we go. Hold on. Where are we? Chaos. Blades of
Yeah.
Khorne? No,
There's
we want
there's a
the
couple of other things. For 40k with Forge World, there's also the Brass Scorpion, which is actually a really cool looking scorpion sort of vehicle, um, which is, I believe, also demonic. It's a demon engine. So there's a couple other things
yeah.
that can be brought in, especially for 40k.
There's a few demon engines. Yeah, there's a few demon engines because they were originated in Epic. So there's the Lord of Battles, which I think we effectively have a version of in 40k. The things I was talking about that kind of like a demon chariots are the Khorne Skull Cannon and the Khorne Blood Throne. Um, we also have. Let me find that for Warhammer 40,000. What a big demon engine is. It's fun. I mean, these will obviously make you know great antagonists for whichever game you're playing. It's a vehicle. Come on, I say it's a vehicle, but it's like no, yeah, it's a Lord of Skulls, which is basically a big tank, but has a huge humanoid body on the
Yeah,
front with a big
the one,
big axe and a chain gun and
yeah,
yeah
the track chassis that has a giant dude on top of it. Oh yeah, that's a
yeah.
classic Khorne design right there.
Yeah. And
Very
then
cool. And of
there are
course,
character demons. There's Skylar Anfingrim, who I remember being in 4th edition Warhammer, um, which is essentially kind of like a bloodhound, but jacked up, kind of.
mm, yeah, there's a couple cool things in there for the demons, and of course we'll explore demons a little bit more in the future chaos episodes. But this wouldn't be Darkhammer without Mike trying to tell people about Black Library novels he read 10 years ago at the very end. So here's two recommendations for you. We've got, if you're interested in that Blood Pact I was mentioning, Dan Abnett's Gaunt's Ghost have them as one of the main antagonists, and they're first introduced in the Guns of Tanith novel. And as well for Warhammer Fantasy, but this actually works really well for Age of Sigmar. There's Blood for the Blood God by C.L. Werner, and this one's cool because it's a Conan style warrior who chases the Skull Taker, who's a named character bloodletter essentially, throughout Norsica and the Chaos Wastes. And as he's chasing after him, he encounters all these different tribes and chaos cults along the way. And the author actually went back and read a bunch of early Warhammer stuff like Slaves to Darkness and Lost in the Damned to get some ideas for how these cults would worship Khorne without calling it Khorne. So I think there actually was like a Raven version of Khorne that someone was worshiping, or a carrion eater type. That did stick out to me when you were talking about that before, Chris. So that one's pretty cool, just for all the different iterations of the chaos gods that you find in it.
Interesting. Yeah, there's there's definitely lots. I think the point is there's a lot of options. There's a lot of ways you can portray it. You know, and I think the point is you can get a lot of fun with this in your games by really throwing curveballs about, is it a cornate cult, or I think actually more often it's a cult that looks like it's, you know, something else but is actually to Khorne, like, and that's where, you know, within, you know, your investigative horror type games of Warhammer, I think that's where you're going to have a lot of fun, where the big reveal occurs and you're like, oh, so this isn't a cult devoted to you know, to Slanesh, or isn't devoted to even to Nagash, or some undead god or something like that. It's actually a Khornate cult underneath it all.
Mm.
But that's good. I mean, that's good. I think making Khorne not obvious is the trick.
Yeah, Chris, have a Mr. Morden character the entire time. And it turns out he's not devoted to Zeech.
Oh
He's devoted to
shit!
Khorne the entire time.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good shout out there. Yeah, Mr. Morden
Yeah.
is, yeah, actually the shadows entirely are, they're not Zechian, they're Khornate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There we go. I
Wow.
think that's the mic drop right there. And Chris, you want to take us out of here?
Yeah. Yeah, on that bombshell then. Right, well, that's been our episode of Darkhammer, all about chaos, and in this particular instance, Khorne. If you have any comments or opinions, you can contact us on darkdaysradio@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Dark Days Radio. You can come over to our Discord, where you can discuss these ideas and more. Tell us where we're wrong, tell us where we're right, tell us your interesting ideas for Khornate cults, which just don't look like Khornate cults, or even give us hints and tips ready, or things you think we should talk about for the next Chaos God, which is undoubtedly going to be Nurgle, because Nurgle is big boy number 2 out of the lot.
Yeah.
Daddy Nurgle. It's going to be fun. I'm going to really enjoy that. And also, I think we have to say at this point, Brendan, if you're if you're listening, yes, you're definitely going to have to be on that episode for it, because obviously you're a massive Plague Marine nut. And yeah, and obviously if you go over to Dark Days Radio, you can listen to our regular episodes. We've got a review coming up about Hunter the Reckoning 5th edition. You can listen to Crystal Mazer's at the start of her series on Introduction to Freelance Writing for Games. Then we also have our episodes from Gen Con, where Chig and Crystal ran a panel on horror in tabletop gaming, and also Crystal ran again another kind of introduction to freelance tabletop writing. I think that's it with everything.
Yeah, definitely. And people got to check out the Realm of Fire, which is now on the channel. And that's an
Of
epic,
course, yeah.
epic wargaming arm to the Darker Days family, I guess you could call it at this point. And they got some spicy hot takes, a lot of Warhammer, and some other RPG, or other war games they like to talk about. So it's good stuff.
Yeah. So that is it for now, and we'll talk to you soon. But goodbye for now. So see ya.
Yep. Take it easy.